Welcome to the Parenting with Impact podcast with your hosts Elaine Taylor-Klaus and Diane Dempster, co-creators of ImpactParents.com, an online community, award-winning blog, and service organization helping parents all over the world to raise complex kids become capable, independent adults.
Hi everyone, Elaine and Diane here, and we know that you want your complex kids to grow up to be happy and independent, and yet you're not always sure how or when to help with that.
In this podcast, we'll encourage you to collaborate with all kinds of complex kids and support them in navigating life and learning.
And we'll interview leading experts from around the world, as well as parents in our own community, talking about how training for parents actually helps these complex kids.
We'll talk about the issues we hear parents struggling with all the time and how a coach approach can support and empower your amazing young people.
We won't tell you what to do. We're going to help you figure out how. So let's move on to the next conversation. Welcome back, everybody, to another conversation in the Parenting with Impact podcast. We have a part 2 today. We are continuing the conversation about emotional intelligence. First part was really about emotion.
It's true story. So let's be transparent here, Elaine. True story. We lost our notes to the first episode and we had to go back and listen again and to try to figure out what did we really talk about so we don't talk about the same thing. So you might have a few repeats, but this is an important topic.
Because we knew that there was going to be 2 and that the second one was going to be about emotional intelligence in the context of social dynamics.
Social stuff. Yeah.
And so that's really what we're going to be talking about today is social stuff, because emotional intelligence shows up in so many different places, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think that, 2 big buckets, and I'm going to oversimplify emotional intelligence, but part of emotional intelligence is your awareness of yourself and your own emotions, whether it's you or your kid. And that's a lot of what we focused on last time. And the other part of it is external, being able to read the room, knowing what's going on, how to be empathetic with other people, how to notice this, how to notice, it's like that sort of, it's more of the focus on the other person's emotions that this second part is, whether it's about social skills. I mean, I don't know that we're going to get it. We're not social skills focused humans. There's lots of great social skills resources out there. We can put links to a couple books that we like that are in our reading carousel and stuff, Elaine, on social skills. And we know that if you've got a complex kid, chances are that many of them have delays in the part of the executive function that helps them to keep up with a conversation with the girls on the playground, or to avoid getting into a fight and a squabble with their sibling about a toy or whatever, or if they're a teenager.
I was going to say, whereas they get older, figuring out how to stay connected in their friend group, or how to stay connected when a friend group is moving a different direction,
or how to date. I mean, I can be honest. I had kids whose executive functions were delayed enough that it's made it hard for them to get out and be social and to talk to people that are strangers and all that stuff. And when you add to it that probably, I don't even know what the statistics are, Elaine, of introverts versus extroverts. I mean, it's just sort of, you've got that other dynamic that from a personality perspective, a lot of these kids are wired differently in terms of their social engagement and how that plays out for them. And so there's a lot of moving pieces.
So let's step back and look at, so we're talking about emotional intelligence and cultivating emotional self-awareness, right? Mm-hmm. And we know that we're talking about kids, people, young adults who are developmentally delayed in some aspects and struggle with executive function issues. So let's talk about what part of this is executive function, and then move into what part of it is kind of environmental. How about that?
Okay.
So let's look at, the executive function is the internal wiring, right? That is required to be able to engage socially effectively.
Well, and so let's just talk about some of the things that tend to get in the way. So impulse control, right? So this sort of, you might have a kid who tends to blurt out, or might tell a secret, or might
think they're trying to be funny and say something really uncomfortable.
Yeah. Or might not be reliable, honestly. It's just sort of, I say I'm going to be there at 10 o'clock and it's 11:30 and I'm still not there. Right. And so a lot of times in social relationships, their issues with time management or other executive functions can get in the way of they're not reliable as a friend sometimes even.
Well, and people interpret those behaviors, right?
Yes.
People interpret, like, just like we as parents can interpret these behaviors. Sometimes friends will interpret rude, disrespectful, unreliable, awkward, uncomfortable, don't care.
True story. I just like this just flashed in. Like my best friend between undergrad and graduate school lived downstairs from me, was always 30 minutes late, always 30 minutes late. And I'm a prompt person. I was raised to be prompt, all kinds of social stuff that goes on in a family dynamic that made me like really on time as a human. And I remember really distinctly for a while being like, hey, can we figure this out? And finally just started telling her we were leaving 30 minutes early because I knew she wasn't going to be able to do it on time. And so even back then I was accommodating my friends probably with executive function challenges, but I didn't even know anything about this stuff back then.
Right, right. So there are all kinds of ways in which the underlying brain wiring can interfere with healthy social dynamics if we're not aware of it, if people don't have an awareness of themselves or of their friends. And so there's a critical piece to that awareness that leads to the capacity to be able to improve the social dynamics.
Well, and whenever we're talking about executive function, we talk about a delay in executive function. When we talk about, are they ready to learn the skill?
Yeah.
Or do we need to accommodate the skill? And a lot of times these kids are ready on some level to develop the skills, but sometimes they're just not. They're so busy over here doing all this other stuff that trying to learn how to take a deep breath and listen to the other person talk is not something that they're ready for because they're like so excited to say whatever they're going to say. So, and the accommodation is reliant on other people, typically other kids that are their peer group, that sort of thing. And so, as a parent, you might, it's the sort of, what is my job when my kid's not getting along with their friends? Or what is my job when, this is true story, when a neighbor parent says, I don't want your child to come over anymore because I can't handle them. It's this sort of, what does your role become? Because you're not in the social setting, you're not the one doing the accommodating. We're really depending on somebody else to get it and to accommodate the challenge. And that can be hard.
Well, there's part of it is accommodating the challenge, and part of it is helping to begin to raise your own person's awareness to the challenge so that they can begin to learn how to self-manage around it. I mean, I was thinking about when one of my kids was leaving home, and that particular kid is a very loud talker sometimes. And there was always a family to very gently and lovingly say, let's bring the volume down. And so we had a conversation before they went away to college about how do you find friends who can let you know when you need to bring the volume down, right?
Yeah.
Just that. And knowing who those people were that they could trust was just the concept of, oh, this is something I need help with was important. Right. And so part of it, I think, is raising the awareness so that they know where to lean into the help to ask for support, right? Whether it's with peers, siblings, family, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Another true story. Man, I've had executive function challenge people all my life. Like roommated in college with the alarm going off 17 times and, trying to help her figure out how to have the alarm go off so it didn't wake me up 17 times because it certainly didn't wake her up 7 times.
Well, and these are true life examples of how when people don't have the self-awareness, they can't manage the behavior. So this keeps coming back to, yes, it may be the wiring, and that makes it all the more important to see how the wiring can impact people around them. Like, what's the impact my executive function challenges has on people in my space?
And that takes a lot of maturity, right? It's just sort of, I've got a parent of a 9-year-old right now, and they're dealing with some sibling issues, and they really just don't have the self-awareness. And it may be years before this self-awareness develops. And mom and dad are impatient now because they want them to figure it out now. And so this is where we often get stuck with kids with these delays in development and executive function, is that they're behind and they're not yet self-aware to go, oh, wait, this is impacting me. And until they're self-aware and can go, oh, this is impacting me, it's differently difficult to get them to engage in activities to help them learn the skills, develop the skills, that sort of stuff.
It's interesting because I'm hearing you talk about siblings, and I'm thinking about how many clients I've had over the years where the issue was in twins, right? You've got one twin who has more sophisticated emotional executive function than the other. And that creates this anger, resentment, frustration.
Or siblings that are close in age, right? This sort of, you got a 12-year-old and a 10-and-a-half-year-old, particularly if they happen to be different genders, and one's got executive function challenges. I mean, they level out really quickly and they get frustrated because I'm more organized than my older sibling is. And that's hard to be with, right?
All right, let's take a break and then let's come back and talk about what people might do about it. Is that cool?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, it's Elaine. And if you like this podcast, you'll love our coach approach. Whether you're a parent looking for support or a professional supporting families, we invite you to download a free guide with 12 key coaching tools at impactparents.com/gift. You can begin using a coach approach to help kids become more independent or improve all of your conversations at work and at home. That's impactparents.com/gift.
Welcome back, everybody. Diane and I are talking about emotional intelligence in the social sphere. And we ended up kind of talking about the impact that executive function can have on emotional capacity and social dynamics. And therefore, how that, if we don't raise the self-awareness to it, how hard that is to manage it. And so part of it is helping kids who may not be ready to understand what their impact is on others to begin to try to figure out how do we help them understand their impact on others or how their behaviors land for other people, whether it's for friends or for siblings or for twins or other family members, right?
So does it make sense to talk a little bit about how we can do some work here? Because I think that there's a lot of the family system is a really great playground experiment for this sort of thing, right? It's this sort of, I remember really distinctly when my kids were younger, playing games together and letting somebody lose their cool and then talking about what it was like for everybody else when somebody lost their cool, and, or working together, helping set the table or so the things we do socially with our kids are really important to kind of pay attention, not to beat it to death, but to just know that those are social interactions and we can use them as opportunities to educate and to teach. What you look like you want to say.
So here's what's coming up as I'm hearing you. It's like, and what's before that? So think what's before that. So first, we as parents need to recognize what's happening here, that these social things we're all worried about may also have an executive function underpinning, right? Let's look at what's going on in the brain. It's always comes back to the brain, right? And then the next thing from there, what do we talk about with the independence triangle is we have to manage our reactivity to it. Right. So the other
piece, it's, oh my gosh, fear, right? It's just sort of, we're terrified. They're never going to have a friend. They're never going to have a boyfriend. They're going to lose their job. They're going to yell at their boss. I mean, all of those things that we get scared of as parents, right?
So we have to manage our own stuff around this. So first, there's recognizing its executive function and getting really clear what our role is in helping to develop their self-awareness. And then we've got to take ourselves out of it. It cannot be us worrying about what happened to us as a child is going to repeat now, or we got to keep our stuff out of it to be able to keep our attention. We like to say over there, right? It really paying attention to what's going on with the kid and supporting the kid and what they need and keeping us out of it. So that's a big, hard piece.
Well, and just to put a pin in it, there's a layer of trust here, right? It's just sort of, if you've got a younger kid who's having a hard time socially, or even a teenager who's having trouble socially, it's that willingness to say, even if they're lagging, I mean, they will get there. I mean, they will eventually figure out how to engage socially in a different way than they are now. And it takes time, and it takes
Well, I'm going to distinguish between trust and believing in what's possible.
Yeah.
Right. So when I heard you say there's a layer of trust, I thought you were going a different direction. So go back there. But what I hear you describing is we have to believe it's possible. We have to
Yes.
see the vision
That's what I mean by
for their
trust.
future,
Yeah.
so that we can help them see that they're going to get there. Right.
Right.
And I've got young adults, one with significant social anxiety. And so still as a young adult, we're having conversations about how do you navigate that dynamic, and what part of that is you and what part of that is you reading into it. Right. So our role with helping them learn to navigate this, if we have the trust built up with them and they can trust us in our relationship, then we can help them raise their self-awareness to the dynamic they're dealing with. Is that fair?
Yeah. No, it is. And when your kids are younger, you're going to have that as a built-in. When your kids are older, you might need to reinsert yourself into their world in a different way than you might be naturally, and pay attention.
Reinvite yourself, maybe.
Reinvite yourself. Yeah. Thank you. Reinvite. So we talked about like using the playground of the family. The other thing I want to talk a little bit about is modeling. But
okay, before we get to modeling, because I was on a roll and I want to go back to the other thing I was trying to say, because the first part was that trust and building the relationship of the trust, and then holding the vision, like you were saying, which I think is so powerful. And then there's something about when we do that, we accept. And our acceptance sets the stage for our family's acceptance. So if you're dealing with sibling dynamics, if you're dealing with close friend dynamics, right, community dynamics, when we truly accept what's going on, and you said when we were in our pre-conversation, Diane said, sometimes your kids are going to be awkward longer than you wish they were.
No, right. And I think that goes back to that thing where we're talking about the executive function. Are they ready to learn the skill, or this is just something you've got to wait and let time play out a little while because they're not yet ready for the skill? And then in that instance, you might need to accept the fact that your kid might be a little awkward. I remember I have one kid whose best friend was 5 years younger than them for the longest time, but they were best buds until socially they ended up in a very different place because one was in high school and one was in elementary school. But from an executive function and from a get together, they were really great together. And so it was just this sort of, okay, they're not going to get along with their peers, but they might get along better with younger kids.
I had a friend in my neighborhood when I was a kid growing up who was about 3 years younger than I. And she and her older brother, who was, I think, a year younger than I, were two of my really close friends for a long time. I don't have any idea what happened to them because I was enough older that, as you say, I kind of aged out. But there was a period of years where they were right on par with me and playing with me at the developmental age that I was ready to play. So it's really okay if you have friends and peers at different ages. It does get to be sticky when you're dealing with siblings who have expectations about how old somebody should be behaving. When you've got maybe a twin who has an expectation, when you've got one sibling who's on par developmentally and one who's not, that can create a whole other layer of complication. Yeah. And I think it's worth, I remember when one of my kids was diagnosed and there was almost this sense of, now we're all here. That was the last kid to get really diagnosed and everybody was like, oh, see, okay, now that kid's one of us. But there was definitely a dynamic that happened in my home with the three kids about fostering their support of each other, their acceptance and support of each other, by kind of dismissing the expectations of the outside world and kind of creating our own TK world. This is what TKs do, right?
Well, and I think that's the piece of it, is that everybody has strengths and challenges. And if you can look at executive functions the same way and say, everybody has strengths and challenges with executive function. I mean, even as adults, the same thing, right? And if that's part of the environment, okay, this one's really good at keeping track of time when we're trying to play a game.
Who's winning the game? Right?
This one's really good about getting the energy up high because we're all so excited and moving forward. I mean, it's just sort of, you pay attention to what everybody's strengths and challenges are in that context, and not, oh, you're not acting like a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old or whatever age it happens to be.
But what that does require is acceptance, playing to their strengths, as you're saying. And then there is something about fostering, inviting an inclusive environment, to create an inclusive environment, to have overt conversations about, you've got gifts in this place. This kids may struggle in this. And as a family, we're gonna love and respect each other no matter what the difference is. That's a way that we can set the tone of our home and set the values of our home, especially with younger children. Right.
Well, and I'm going to say that inclusion, that word is kind of a tricky one because like I happen to be coaching this family around this issue. And part of what they're working on is how do I create a safe space for this one to be separate from this one because they're really annoying, right? It's a sort of if you have to be like, we're always together as a family versus let's figure out how to not always be together as a family because your sibling annoys you sometimes.
Which is legitimate. And if they're waiting, if they never have the break, then they can't embrace the connection when they're together. It's kind of like when you're waiting and you don't know if it's ever going to happen, then you can't let it go because you don't know, right? So what you're saying is so on point. It's a yes and. It's creating an environment to raise their awareness so that they can understand what's happening with each other. And we want to, on the one hand, give the message of support and inclusion and connection. And on the other hand, the other message that was so powerful for us in our family was everyone in this family is going to get their needs met and nobody's going to need the same thing.
Yeah.
That piece, everyone, and that my kids can all repeat that to you in different ways, right? You will all get your needs met. I commit that to you. I promise you can count on me for that. And that doesn't mean you're all going to need the same thing. So it's not that it's unfair if she gets that or he gets that, because everybody's going to get their needs met, including you. And so that kind of dances around some of that, but it's not fair thing that comes up with siblings a lot.
Yeah. Well, and that could be a whole other episode on what to do when your kids.
Maybe we'll do a sibling session, right?
Yeah, that's a good idea. So how do we wrap this up? Because there's so many different pieces to this. We talked about awareness. We talked about executive function. We talked about modeling. We talked about, how do you want to wrap it up?
It's a great question. I think the biggest thing that's really jumping at me, if I ask myself the final 4 questions, what was I focusing on, right? If we go back to what are we focusing on here? We're looking at emotional intelligence and its relationship with social dynamics. And we're really talking about executive function and its relationship to social dynamics even more, because it's that part of of executive function that can become such a challenge for neurospicy people, right?
Yep.
So if that's the case, then it's about understanding it's always about the coaching model, isn't it? Right? If we know there's a behavior that we want to see improve, then we can take aim on in that, understand what's playing into the dynamic. We have to start with an acceptance of this is where we are right now.
Yeah.
If we meet them where they are right now, then we can invite people and guide people and help people move towards what's the healthiest for themselves, both together and apart. What would you add?
And it's, again, it's that believing in what's possible, managing your own stuff because it may not happen as fast as you wish that it would. And so it's avoiding the catastrophizing that can happen when your kid is really struggling for a period of time, because they might really struggle for a period of time, and taking those opportunities to connect with your kid yourself, meet them where they are, even if their peers are having a hard time doing that, and look for those moments to help build the skills when they're ready, not to make every moment a teaching moment. Oh my gosh, let's not do that. Sometimes just have fun. Just sometimes have fun playing a game instead of always making it about learning a social skill. But yeah. And the cool thing about this is that it's one of those tools that not only helps your child to develop, but also strengthens the relationship in the family. And I think that whenever we have that opportunity, because we always say start with a relationship. Mm-hmm. And if starting with a relationship is part of what will make this easier, because being social is all about relationship, this is like a little bonus thing because you get to do both at the same time, I think.
Well, and you guys have heard us say this many times. If you don't know where to focus, there are 2 places to start. Lean into relationship and focus on self-care. And both of those show up here.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. This is about relationship. It's about connecting to help people feel acceptance and safety so that they can practice learning new things. And we got to take care of ourselves and keep our own stuff out of it so that we can be present to them without collapsing our stuff onto theirs. How's that?
Awesome. Great. Awesome. Thanks for being here and listening with us. Thanks for what you're doing for yourself and for your kids.
You guys, you make a huge difference. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next one.
You've been listening to the Parenting with Impact podcast with Elaine and Diane. For more information on the Impact Parents community or to join Sanity School for Parents, please visit impactparents.com. If you like what you've heard, please share this podcast with friends who need similar guidance and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. For the essentials of Elaine and Diane's coach approach to parenting, download a free tip sheet at impactparents.com/podcast.
Behavior therapy training for parents is actually recommended as a first-line treatment for complex kids. For information about Sanity School, our training program for parents or teachers, which has helped thousands of families around the globe, visit impactparents.com/sanityschool.